Tonight we have a very special guest, Jacob Siwak of Forsythia. So Jacob is on a mission to reinvent what the restaurant can be. So he's an alum. Well, he and his team are alums of some of the city's best restaurants, including Olmsted, Misi, and Resdora. And Jacob went to Rome and discovered a whole new way of sort of running a restaurant, one that's centered around the needs of both the people that work there as well as the guests. And he returned after that trip to Rome to open Forsythia, a Roman restaurant based in Italian cooking and New York hospitality. It's a very special place. It got a write-up in New York Magazine today, so check that out. It was already a hard reservation to get. I suspect that after today's article, it's going to be even more difficult, so recommend getting in there now on Resi. So would love to get started. So
I just want to say thanks for having me, Trish. And something I have not told you yet that I wanted to start off by saying is that I went to a secondary school in St. Louis that was grades 7 through 12. And as a seventh grader, I had to write a note to my senior and high school self about what I should be looking forward to upon graduation. And I recently had a chance to reread that note, and I wrote to myself that I was probably so excited to be already accepted into Stanford and ready to start my college journey there. Obviously, it didn't work out for me in that way, but it's truly an honor to be associated with you guys in really any capacity. It's something that was a dream of mine when I was 12 years old. So I feel very honored to be talking with you all.
Well, it's truly an honor to have you. Just wanted to jump right in. So I've never personally worked in the restaurant industry, but everything I've read from like Anthony Bourdain books and Gabrielle Hamilton, it just seems that there's a very different way of like working in the industry than what we experience as guests. It's sort of like the swan, sort of like it looks peaceful and on the surface, but below the surface of the water, furious paddling. Can you tell us a little bit about what it's actually like?
Very much so. So, and I imagine that this is something that we'll break into a lot more as we keep talking. But I've had some radically different experiences working in a variety of different restaurants, and more or less in New York, it's all been the same. It's been really brutal, really long hours. You're expected to get there early and stay there late. You're expected to do more than what's really required of you, and you're essentially always asked to push yourself further and further and further and further until you essentially reach a breaking point, leave a restaurant, and then take a quick break and start it all again at a different restaurant. And then as Trish mentioned, I went to Rome, and I had a very, very, very different experience cooking there, where none of that was happening. Everyone that I was working with, and myself included, were all leading balanced lives. We were, very busy with work, but it wasn't what drove our existence, and it wasn't what was really all consuming to our purpose and to our time. And so that was a really radically different experience for me. It was something that I didn't even realize was possible working in a restaurant or working in a kitchen, and was super eye-opening. And I'd like to think that working here is a lot more akin to what working in Rome was like, rather than what my experience has been like working at a variety of other New York restaurants. But it can just be, especially in New York, very, very, very personally difficult. A lot of times, front of house operators will refer to the flow of service as a play or an act, and it's very much so, because you're masking a lot of how you're feeling, or the way that you would normally behave. It would not be the way that you're acting towards the guest. So what I'm really trying to do, and it's what I'm sure we'll unpack at great length, is kind of have that feeling of being hospitable just be the norm, just be the way that you feel in your daily life, and not really isn't something that's forced, isn't a play, isn't an act, but is really something that's natural, and something that we're able to just bring out in our staff.
And when you returned from Rome, I think you called it Dinner Under the Stairs, the first iteration of the restaurant. Can you talk about what that was and how that informed what you eventually ended up building?
Absolutely. So I basically I came back with this, it was a theory, I'll say, that our ability to be so relaxed, so de-stressed, kind of at ease with ourselves. The theory was that that environment would directly lead to a better guest experience, not just a better staff experience, but also in turn a better guest experience. We are ultimately still a business. We still need to generate revenue, and if it just works for us but not for our guests, then that's not necessarily an equation that works. So it has to be something that not just works for us, but also builds upon and enhances the guest experience. So that was really the hypothesis. And so Brian and I set out to do it in this incredibly, I guess, low stakes, low cost, low overhead endeavor. We leased a small studio apartment that had this lofted set of stairs. So all four of the tables were beneath the stairs, hence dinner under the stairs. And we sat 8 guests a night, 3 or 4 nights a week. And we essentially just ran a proof of concept of whether or not something like this would work, something where we could just invite guests into a much more homey feeling and much more relaxed environment, and see if that was something that directly translated into an enhanced guest experience. And it did. It very much worked. We saw the effect pretty much immediately from guest feedback. And it was pretty overwhelming, honestly. It was very, very exciting to see, and proved that theory correct. And eventually, there was enough demand at the pop-up that we had to look for more space.
That's great. It seems very lean startup, basically creating like sort of a
Very
minimum
lean
viable
startup.
product, and then getting feedback from that. What were the most surprising things you learned from that initial experience?
Ooh, that is a great question. There were a lot of
Mhm.
surprising things. One, the biggest takeaway was that, you know, I the food I cook, I know that it's good. I know it would be very naive to say that I have the best food in New York. And the same would be for our hospitality, especially at that point when it was just me and Brian, and I didn't have the support of this incredible team that I have here at Forsythia. So that's really, I didn't have what I would really consider to be the most unbelievable food, and I didn't really have what I would consider to be the most unbelievable hospitality. Certainly they were both solid, but somehow this just feeling of like feeling disarmingly relaxed was such an overwhelming feeling that none of that really mattered. And the guest experience was still so overwhelmingly positive that we've had a number of diners that have eaten at dinner under the stairs. They ate at our East Village pop up, and they've eaten here.
Mhm.
And 100% of those diners will still say that dinner under the stairs was their preferred dining experience. So it's a feeling that I know we need to continue working towards evoking here, and something that is really a daily struggle for us, because now we're in a bigger space and we are a New York restaurant. So how do you really tear down that wall and create this illusion that you're not that? Um, and that was a really surprising thing that I learned, that, food and hospitality, I recognize how important they are, but they're really just a component in a greater experience and in a greater picture. And unless that whole picture is functioning on all cylinders, the rest doesn't really matter. It was a pretty significant takeaway.
And what do you think makes the Forsythia experience right now special? So, having been there, I feel that it is. But curious from your perspective and what you've seen from guest feedback, what do you think makes
Well, we're
what's the alchemy?
we're we're certainly getting there in terms of getting closer and closer to the feeling that was brought out in our diner when we had dinner this year. It is our food and our hospitality. We're really just firing on all cylinders with those two things, and we're making all of our pasta here in house, which a lot of restaurants aren't doing. And then the last thing that we're doing that I think is really adding to our success, I think I might have, can I re-ask the question? Was it in
Yep.
terms of the guest experience or just Forsythia's success overall?
Um, I would say let's answer both.
So in terms of the guest experience, it really just comes down to a really, really, really high standard of food service and hospitality. And the hospitality is something that we need to, I will be forthcoming and saying we need to continue working towards getting it closer and closer to dinner under the stairs and making it more and more of an experience rather than just another dinner in New York. I do think that as we are keeping this in mind, we're still able to make it something that's a little bit more than just a typical dinner experience in New York. So we're certainly starting to hit the nail on the head, but we can hit it fully on the head moving forward. And then what I'd like to add is in terms of our success as a business, we have an incredible in-house person doing our PR and our marketing. And something that I was taught from one of my mentors, something that I learned spending a lot of time at Olmsted was that there's just an unmistakable value in having a lot of talent on the PR side of things, on the marketing side of things, especially in kind of the social media times that we're in right now.
Mhm.
And she's done such an excellent job that I would really attribute a lot of the business's success to that as well.
Definitely. And we actually had heard about the restaurant through Instagram. So your Instagram presence has been phenomenal. um, so you opened up Forsythia during the pandemic, but the plans for the restaurant had started before that. How did sort of the events of the past year change your plans, and how did you adapt?
They changed our plans very significantly. We'll start with a visual. This type of window, well, the visual isn't so good, but originally we had these massive doors here that were sealed shut permanently, and they were nice big glass windows where you could see out to the street. But just in the physical nature of the space, we made a ton of adaptations that we wouldn't have done originally. We put these windows in, we put in something called a makeup air unit that brings in fresh air and circulates out the old every 120 to 150 seconds, and made a bunch of these like really specific technical changes that are allowing our diners to feel more comfortable, allow our staff to feel more comfortable. So that's really the first place to begin, but there's a lot more beyond that. We were originally slated to open in May. That didn't happen. We opened in November, and it really left us with a choice of whether or not we wanted to just wait and run it out. We were capitalized well enough that we could have just sat on the full rent and just done nothing, and we could have opened probably around now or a little bit ago. But that felt like it was a waste of time and was ultimately probably a waste of our resources as well. So we negotiated with our landlord. We were very lucky that he was willing to, go to the table with us and work on a deal and not just say it's my way or the highway. We were able to get 50% off of our rent, which then in turn allowed us to go to a new location while we were finishing up construction here. And we did our pop-up in the East Village for 3 months over the summer, which is how we first met you and Mark. And that really, it was something I knew that I was capable of doing, that Brian was capable of doing. I knew, Mark's been cooking in enough kitchens that it's something that he could do with his eyes closed. Brian and I felt very comfortable cooking under abnormal circumstances because we'd been doing it out of an apartment for a year. And it essentially provided us 3 free months of marketing leading up to the restaurant opening. We were able to make all of our money back. We were break even the entire time. And we were essentially just able to establish a customer base of over 1,000 guests, an email list, a reputation. We were able to start getting the PR machine going, which again is honestly the most valuable part of the whole thing. And it allowed us to, when we opened here, just immediately hit the ground running. There was none of that kind of grace period, none of that getting our feet under ourselves period. That had all happened over the summer. All that exposure was already there, and we were just able to immediately come in and just fly with it.
So I remember with the East Village pop-up, there was a lot of menu testing that you were doing. What other tests behind the scenes as well were you experimenting with?
There were a few. we played a lot with the tipping structure. That was probably the biggest one. And then really, from a software and hardware perspective, you've seen when you dine with us that we bring an electronic terminal to every table instead of a bill. Believe it or not, it saves us almost 15 minutes on every table and allows us to bring more turns in. And I don't understand why restaurants are clinging on to this ancient method of they bring a bill, you put the card in the bill, they take the bill back, they put the card in something, they bring it back to the table, then you sign the bill, then they have to recollect. It just, none of that makes sense. So we started out with this terminal system. We were seeing how that works. We were workshopping that. We ran into a bunch of internet connectivity issues with that. There were a lot of hurdles that were completely unexpected, a bunch of weird last minute failures with how it would work, but we ironed all of that out. And now it's been a really, really nice system for us here. It saves us a ton of time that is really, really, really valuable to us. And that was really the biggest part, that and just playing around with our tipping structure. Those were the two biggest things by a lot. And then we settled on a tipping structure where we now mandate an 18% tip. And since it's not discretionary to any of our guests, we can then report it as generalized revenue, and we can distribute it to our entire staff, our cooks, our porters, everyone. If tip is discretionary, it actually, by law in New York City, can only be shared amongst the servers, which is a terrible rule. So over the summer, we were playing with doing what Danny Meyer does and just raising menu prices and having no tip. A lot of different methods of working in kind of the no tipping structure. There are a lot of different ways you can work around it, and eventually we settled on this as being the most effective.
So I think the tipping model is super interesting. You had talked about creating a company that's really contextualized around people's needs, and so it's really taking care of the entire staff. And so even with your tipping model, it's not just taking care of the servers; it's making sure that everyone on your staff is properly cared for. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're building a business that's really about that holistic view?
Well, it shouldn't be as challenging or as big of a deal as it is. Um, it should be something that is done from the outset. There was an interesting article in the New York Times. Now I can't remember the name of it, but there was a really, really, really key line in it where it was talking about how this restaurateur wished they could have just gone back to the drawing board and restarted things in a different way. And to me, it was just like, well, why didn't you just do it that way the first time? It's not that hard. And it just takes setting your own expectations and modeling the business around that. And as soon as you do that, and as soon as you run a model that says, this is the business I'm going to run, is it financially viable or is it not? If the answer is yes, it's still financially viable, then that's the way every company should be proceeding. And too often I look around at other restaurants and I see them, that model is available to them, and they're ignoring it in favor of one that's going to make them a little bit more money. Mm-hmm. And as you can see from the pandemic that just happened, that is not in case of emergency, that's not a sustainable model. It's a model that closed a lot of restaurants, that maybe needlessly, which is a tough thing to say, but if a lot of these restaurants had been positioned differently, they wouldn't have been in as tough of a position as they ended up in. And I feel very lucky that we didn't open before the pandemic. I do a lot different, but that allowed us to then start small and again just position ourselves in a way where we didn't have to lay anyone off and we didn't have to make any backwards moves. We were able to just start doing it the right way. So we never just made these giant blanket hires. We just slowly added one component to another, to another, to another, until finally, we got to the staff we needed to be at, and um, we were never doing it in a way that was sacrificing the quality of life or really overworking any of our staff. It's just about how you start doing it. If you start under the right context, it's the same principle as keeping your room clean. If you start keeping your room clean, it's a lot easier to keep your room clean than it is to clean up a really, really, really messy room. It's the exact same principle.
Right. I think in the startup industry, we're familiar with this concept of tech debt. So if you don't sort of take care of your code in the beginning, you're eventually going to have
Same
to
thing.
pay the thing. Yeah, I find that operationally as well. It's like it's even more complicated sometimes operationally because it's real people, real physical goods as well. Switching gears a little bit. So you had mentioned before that you had grown up learning how to make fresh pasta in your grandmother's kitchen. Um, how did your childhood shape who you are today?
Significantly so, in a very positive way. I was very lucky to be raised by the parents I was raised by and have the grandparents that I have. My grandma comes from a family that is based in Campania in southern Italy, which is awesome to have. My first experience in Italy was when I was, I want to say 8 or 9, going to my cousin Pepe's wedding in a tiny little town in southern Italy. So that was an incredible thing to grow up and be a part of. My mom used to make handmade pasta growing up, and that was a pretty amazing environment to grow up just from a food and eating perspective. I just got to eat an awesome home cooked meal every night. But a little bit more deeply than that, I think that my upbringing is what allowed me to kind of go into these situations with a lot more compassion than most people might have, or I should say that most people that are in the industry that I work in might have. I definitely don't think that that's the norm or the way people are in general. It is in restaurants though, and I feel very, very, very lucky to have that. I don't think that it's something that I on my own was able to develop. It was something that was instilled in me by a lot of people, and that's what allows us to then shape our business around everyone that I work with instead of around myself.
And even with your parents, you had mentioned that your parents had inhabited two different worlds, and so you sort of
Very
grew up
much
like
so.
sort of one part art, one part business. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
My mother is a publisher and grew up as I was growing up, uh, she did a lot of journalism when I was a lot younger, and then she got her master's in creative writing and then started a little publishing house that's based out of St. Louis called December Press. It is an awesome little publication. Everyone should look it up. And then my dad was in business operation. Was has always been a business ops guy, and that kind of combo of a background has led me to this very nice place where I'm really at the intersection of doing something that's really fulfilling for me from a creative and artistic standpoint, and is also very fulfilling for me from a business standpoint and from an operational standpoint. It's very fun that I get to kind of do both things. I get to have my cake and eat it too. So I feel nothing but very lucky to have that combination of a background. I lean on my dad a ton for help. He is incredibly knowledgeable on what it takes to run a business. And I lean on him on a pretty daily basis for advice. It's something I've never done before and something he's been doing for a long, long time now. And I'd be a fool not to utilize that resource. So I utilize it as much as I can, as much as he is available to me.
And you had mentioned you had happened to go to the same high school as Danny
I
Meyer.
think he's right there
Oh, he's
listening.
right there. Ah.
I did go to the same high school as Danny Meyer.
And how did that, if anything, change things for you?
Well, I have this very old copy of Setting the Table that I have now made required reading here that I got from him when I was in 10th grade. He spoke at my high school as the alumni of the year when I was a sophomore, and it was just something that really resonated with me. And I went to a high school where you were very much expected to uh, deliver academically. It was a very academically driven high school where the goal was to get into a good school and then from there go into a variety of pretty standard fields. And this was the first time that someone had really ever come into my high school and said, here's something different that you can do that's a possibility.
Right.
It's not just X, Y, or Z. This also exists. And this is also something that I did coming from this environment. And so that was pretty eye-opening, and was really what got the gears going.
And
I will say I
that,
was very lucky to have all 4 of his kids come dine here just last week. It was very fun.
oh my gosh, what a small world. And you've had some amazing mentors over your time. I mean, starting with your dad. Um, what have you learned from some of these luminaries?
Well, my dad, I lean on mostly on really a day-to-day thing. If I have a question about how to handle any particular circumstance, that's really what I lean on him for. It's the first time I've managed this many people. That is for me the hardest part about uh, this entire project. I've cooked a ton, I've served a ton, I have managed people to some extent. This is by far the most I've done that. He's done this he can do that part in his sleep, and so I really lean on him a lot for that part of advice. And then I've been very lucky to have Max Katzenberg, who is the managing owner at Olmsted, in my ear a bunch. And I've been lucky to be able to pick the brain of 2 restaurateurs in Chicago named Rob Katz and Kevin Boehm, who the 2 of them own the Boca Group in Chicago. They're about 17 restaurants, 15 restaurants, although I think they may have closed 5 or 6 over the last year. But they have been, particularly Max, over the years, have really, really guided how I think about restaurants and have made it, especially Max, again, really obvious to me what the most important things are to developing the success of a restaurant in New York. Most notably is what I mentioned earlier, which was the PR machine. It was just something that he hammered the importance of to me when I was the maitre d' there. And it was something that, as the maitre d', and then when I was making all of the reservations and running the book and handling all of the emails at Olmsted, it was something that I had my finger on very, very, very directly. And it became very obvious to me when this was a thing, as this became more and more of a real idea, and as we signed a lease, that was something that we were going to really have to go fully, fully, fully headlong into. And he's been constantly reiterating to me the importance of even little things. Make sure you're shooting everything. Every photograph has to be taken horizontally and vertically.
Mm.
And he's put me in touch with a lot of the right people from a PR and marketing standpoint. And as you can see, it's been a lot of what's driven our success and a lot of what's driving people through the door. And it's been invaluable, honestly.
I mean, given this is, I mean, such a new environment with social media being so dominant, what do you feel like, I guess, given that PR is so important, what does it take in order to succeed in this modern era?
Well, it takes 2 things, because just getting people through the door isn't enough.
Mhm.
You have to then, and this is where everyone here really comes into play, you have to walk the walk too.
Right.
And that's the second part of the equation. But Emily, who does all of our PR and she handles our social page entirely, she's been really creative about reaching out to influencers and reaching out to people with a really broad following, and in any capacity into the restaurant. She looks for several things. The first being just their total follower count. But
Right.
then the second is she's always looking at the general engagement and the how how engaged that person's followers are. Just having a lot of followers is not even remotely the beginning of what we're looking for. We're looking for people that have a ton of engagement with the people that are following them, a lot more than we are for just sheer followers. Someone like Hannah Chang, who owns Mimi Chang's, who only has 5,000 or 6,000 followers, but has a ton of engagement and a lot of really influential people following her, is a lot more valuable to us coming through the door than someone with 150,000 followers that gets very few likes. And she is incredibly active about going out and finding these people and bringing them into our restaurant, as opposed to just waiting for them to come. And that has just been really driving traffic through the door, because as soon as they're posting, it's a positive feedback loop. So they post, it generates more attention to us, which then causes more people to come in and post, which causes more people to want to come in. And we haven't really been allowed enough time to really see this positive feedback loop get rolling. This is really the first period of time that we've been open that we expect to be open for just months on end. And you can really already see the effect taking place. The New York Mag article hit today. We had a really, really, really nice bit of engagement yesterday through Instagram as well. We picked up another 400 followers, which for an account that is only at like 3,300 right now is a pretty massive percentage. And that positive feedback loop is really just starting to kick in. And it's pretty exciting to watch it get going.
Were there any inflection points for you in terms of sort of PR and marketing machine that changed things for you?
And like, will you be a little more specific? Sorry.
I mean, throughout, it's been a hard reservation to get since the get-go. But were there any points at which sort of things changed for you guys? Either through an external perception, but also internally as a team?
Not really. That's where having someone like Max in my ear from the beginning was so valuable. It wasn't really something that I had to learn as we went. It was something that he was overwhelming me by just constantly telling me how important it was. So when we opened up in the East Village, we were immediately sending out press releases in-house, and within the first week we were in the New York Times. And so really even when we were in the East Village, that was a ball that we had already gotten rolling. And we were we only had 8 seats there, so it felt even more difficult to get a reservation than it actually was. And I think that probably fed into it a little bit and fed into the desire to want to come eat there. The perception that it was really difficult to get a reservation, even if 10 people wanted to book, you'd still be fully booked. And so, no, I really don't think there was like this huge inflection point or tipping point. It really was something where I was lucky to be aware of that from the get-go. I was lucky to have mentors that told me this is something you need to be on top of 2 weeks before you open, not 3 months after you open. And that really allowed us to just come in and hit the ball as soon as we opened.
And so one of the other lessons that you would mention that you learned from your mentors is the importance of agility. So starting with, vision A, but ending up with something a little bit different. Can you talk a little bit more about that, given the environment?
That is something that my dad stresses over and over and over again, is the ability to be nimble and the ability to be agile, especially now given the circumstances. And it's difficult because I'm not the only person that works here, and I have to be constantly communicating things that we're changing on an almost daily basis to an entire team of people, and that can get really tricky at times. That's for sure the hardest part of it to manage. But there's such a limited capacity right now, especially for restaurants, to try and get close to the revenue that they would normally be generating, that you are honestly left with no choice but to just try as many things as possible and see what works. I know that you wanted to touch on the marketplace a little bit, and I
Mhm.
feel like this is an apt time to do so. But something that I had really been wanting to work towards that um, I felt like was a really easily scalable aspect of our business that I had really wanted to honestly get to more down the road when we already had more of a brand established and we had name recognition that we could hit the market and say, this is something that Forsythia is doing and have that actually land with some impact. We got to a little bit earlier than expected, given the circumstances, but we launched this marketplace when we came back from our holiday break in January with a bunch of frozen pastas, our sauces, gelatos, everything that is sold we make here. We don't resell anything. There's nothing that we're just buying and marking up and reselling. Everything we are selling is fully made in house, and it's one of many things that we've tried to just open up these tiny little revenue streams to try and bring us a little bit closer to what we expected that 100% to be. There's really not, you have no choice but to try out these things. So as weather permits us to try a few more of them, you'll see us start to try some more fun things. We have this item on our menu called supli, which is our most popular item by a significant amount. It's
Mm.
essentially this fried cheese ball. It is a staple of Roman street food. We plan to do a supli window over the summer where we're just selling our supli out of the window for a weekend afternoon or two. A bunch of these little ideas. We're going to try and go to the Hamptons for a weekend. We're going to try and do a collaboration with several other restaurants over the summer. You just have to keep finding ways to chip in and get a foot in the door, even if it's just going to be a little uptick in revenue. It's all worth it.
And how do you find inspiration for these new concepts?
Ooh, eating, eating a lot, and just talking about it with everyone here, and it's all I think about, for better or for worse. It's all I think about. It's a good thing and a bad thing. It's all consuming, but it's what I'm the owner of a restaurant in New York that just opened 4 months ago. It's all I should be thinking about. And so it really just comes from thinking about it all the time. Everyone here comes up with awesome ideas. Um, it just is kind of on the whim, honestly.
And how do you prioritize choosing which ideas to action on?
I place as It's really a question of whether or not it's going to stick around long term.
Right.
If it's something that can stick around long term, there's a way higher priority on it. The marketplace being a perfect example of that. It's something that once we establish, I never want to take it away. And so it's of maximum importance to me. That's really, really, really vital to me to the scalability of this business. Something like the Supli window is really fun and really nice. I don't think it's necessary to the scalability of this restaurant. So that's really how I prioritize it. Is it something that's going to stick around long term? Is it something that's going to be um, a temporary short term burst of revenue, or is it something that's going to be a long term, really sustainable way for us to grow as a business?
And what is your vision ultimately for the marketplace?
It really depends on what the demand is for it. I would really like to see it grow into um, a more attainable version of Italy, honestly. I don't view our competition as being these other restaurants that have popped up a marketplace and door. I really view our competition as being Italy. Our ceiling, I think, is really, really high on what our ability to do is. The feedback on our product has been excellent so far. And we really just need the space and to keep being consistent with what we're offering to just increase our demand slowly but surely. Um, that's really there's we need to be very, very, very consistent with what we're offering. And I believe that we'll see the demand can just continue to rise over time, especially as we see more things like the New York Mag article come out and we develop a lot more brand credibility. that's really what I think will allow us to grow, build a commissary kitchen somewhere and produce a lot of our stuff for a lot less cost than what we're doing right now, and really expand upon what we're offering.
And how do you get into the zone creatively? So, I mean, this can be either from a business perspective, but also even just, so I've seen you sort of on the fly sort of create new dishes. Like one of the more interesting restaurant experiences I've had recently is you had brought out a plate of tortellini and asked for a bunch of diners' feedback. By the time I had left my meal, you had actually perfected it, changed up the sauce, and put it on that evening's menu. Um, can you talk about like your thought process as you do things like this?
Everything that happens with the food is a total team effort. It is not just me. There are a lot of other people here that are insanely good at what they do, better than me, in fact, that are helping me along the way with all of those things. So it's really just a conversation amongst us. I feel lucky to have coworkers that have been working in restaurants for a really long time, to have coworkers that have lived and experienced Italy and have worked in Italy and cooked in Italy. That's not easy to find. That's a really valuable thing to me and for me to have. And it's just a conversation with them. What's not working about this? How can we make it better? What about it isn't working? Why isn't it working? And what about that thing not working needs to get improved upon for it to then be taken to the next level? And then once it's at the next level, you shift it back a place and you do that constant examination again and try and improve upon it the next time. And we're doing that with all of our dishes. Our wild boar ragu we've had on the menu for almost 6 weeks now. And every single time we make that, we're trying to improve upon it and update the process and make it better than we made it the last time. Because it's a recipe we wrote. So how can we expect it to be the best iteration of it, even the fourth time that we've ever made it? There's just no way. Right. In order for it to be the best iteration, we have to make it dozens and dozens and dozens of times, which is just something we don't really have the luxury of doing before we put it on the menu. So it's just constant tweaking. I feel lucky to work with a bunch of people that have the palate that they have. They know where a dish is lacking and where a dish is succeeding, and will keep what's succeeding, ditch what's lacking, and just only build upon it.
And do you take the same process for guest experience as well? Like, how does this happen beyond
100%. Something that I think that my dad described to me was that in every experience, not just restaurants, there are peaks and troughs, right, the good parts and the bad parts. And the whole, I mean, any business can be looked at that through that lens, and really any part of any business can be looked at through that lens. So we can look at our food through that lens, and we can also look at the hospitality aspect through that lens. What parts are working, what parts aren't working, and how can we build upon them? And as we continue to bring in more seasoned and professional front of house personnel as well, we'll start to experiment with what we do in the front of house also. And we'll start to build closer and closer to that dinner under the stairs experience that I feel like we need to work towards. And now we have the ability to keep experimenting with the service as well. Even with something very simple like a full reset of plates. It's something that we haven't tried yet because I thought people would be a lot more sensitive to that because of germs and wanting people to touch their plates. I never really had the ability to just try it and see if it was something people were reacting to positively or negatively. I tried it 2 nights ago and people did not like it. So we won't do it again. And it's just nice to have that ability to experiment and see what is working and isn't working. We look at every single part of the business that way, from the operational standpoint that isn't seen to the front of house aspect that is seen to the dishes on the menu. Every single thing is constantly being workshopped like that.
And how did you build that into your culture as a company?
I don't really think I needed to. I think that it's, fortunately part of what comes with working in a restaurant. It's pretty expected of any cook or anyone working in a restaurant that the systems constantly need to be updated or just optimized, especially and to the cooking aspect of it. It's pretty easy once you have um, a really efficient front of house system locked down to have that in place. But if we're making up our own recipes, then we have to be constantly adapting and improving upon them. And that's something that's just in the nature of any good chef, which every single person that works here is. Um, and so it's not really, thankfully, something that I had to instill. It's something that was pretty naturally instilled upon everyone that works here because of how talented they are.
It seems that these are some lessons that traditional companies can take as well in order to sort of optimize things over time. What in particular about running a restaurant do you think sort of contributes to building that into the culture, that culture of continuous optimization?
I think it really comes back to, what I was just saying about recipes and to developing what a good recipe looks like. If you're being fed a recipe that's already existing, it's just the same thing. You're repeating the exact same thing over and over and over again, which is at a certain point exactly what we need to be doing coming out of the kitchen. But what is just a natural part of us here at the restaurant is we're developing a lot of our own techniques, from pasta making to uh, every single one of our recipes, that if we don't have the mindset that we can constantly be improving and that we're not already the best that we can possibly be, if we don't have that mindset, then we're essentially going backwards all the time.
Mm.
We're just being lost in the muck of all of these different other restaurants in New York. It's just way too competitive, especially in the Italian food scene in New York, to not be moving forward constantly. There's just way too much at stake, and um, everyone here recognizes that's just part of what developing recipes is, and it's fun.
Mm.
Developing a recipe it's not like a chore. It's not hard work. It's fun and creative, and it's an enjoyable process rather than it being something that we really have to force people through.
And given the competitiveness of this space, Italian restaurants in New York, how do you envision sort of staying ahead of the curve over time? So this can extend beyond menu, but even to experience as well.
So having the outdoor structure permanently in place really reshaped our business model in a positive way. Where before we were really reliant upon 3 full turns inside just to get to 75 guests on a nightly basis, we now have like 45 seats, which is crazy given that we were only scheduled to have 25 originally,
Mm.
and our rent has not gone up. So it's this beautiful situation where we can scale back what we wanted to do. We can do fewer turns and actually still do more covers. We
Mm.
can reduce our hours of operation and still generate more revenue. And so that's really how I see this being a sustainable thing for a really long period of time. Is just we'll never really, I don't ever see the need. This is going back to one of the first things I was saying when I was saying that a lot of restaurateurs build this model that is profitable and they change the model to try and squeeze out more profit.
Mhm.
That'll never happen here. It's just not the way I want to run this business. It's not the way that I think it makes sense for us to generate more revenue. I'd rather open up a second restaurant and try and generate more revenue through a second restaurant than try and squeeze this place for every single last drop that I can possibly squeeze it for. Just doesn't make sense to me. And it would, I think, ultimately cost us more in the long run, trying to squeeze out more in the short run. So as we are able to increase our capacity, we'll probably actually reduce our hours of operation and we'll back the turn. And despite that, we'll actually be able to increase upon the revenue that we initially had anticipated for ourselves and increase upon uh, the number of guests that we expected to seat on a nightly basis, which is, again, incredibly lucky.
I mean, it seems very fortuitous, but also going back to
It
what you were,
honestly is
yeah,
really fortuitous, and I think a lot of restaurants have gotten very unlucky. It is really the outside seating is fully a matter of luck or not luck.
right.
You know, it wasn't something that I was looking into when I was looking to lease this space. It's something that no other restaurateurs were thinking about. And we really got lucky with how wide our space is compared to how deep it is, that
Right.
we're able to have so much seating outside in comparison to how much we have in. It was a real break.
But it allows you to sort of take care of both the guests as well as everyone on your staff, giving people more space in order to, I guess, be creative as well. When you were talking about reducing hours, I mean, it's basically the exact opposite of the burnout that you were describing at the beginning of this.
Exactly. I'm very excited about it. It's something that I didn't really see coming. It's been, a huge piece of silver lining throughout this entire pandemic. The whole year, it's been a
Right.
huge piece of silver lining. Has been being able to have this outdoor structure permanently moving forward. It's a true gift.
And so, relatedly, what does success look like for you?
That's a tough question, Trish. Success to me looks like um, a fulfilled staff and a restaurant that can run sustainably to keep fulfilling that staff. I know that's a pretty broad answer, but as long as the business is healthy, um, and we're able to really operate under what I was really just outlining, 2 full turns on a nightly basis, we can then really treat our staff the right way and allow every single part of the equation to be really operating fully.
That's great. We also have a couple of questions from the audience as well. There was a couple of questions around tipping. So you had talked about how you were experimenting with different tipping structures over time. One, how do you feel about potentially federally mandated minimum wage? And also, how have customers reacted both positively and negatively to a mandated tip?
So federally mandated minimum wage, I am fully supportive of. Every single person that works here makes well above the federally mandated minimum wage, so it wouldn't affect us really. Everyone makes well above that here, and I think that that's something that absolutely needs to be happening. What was the second part of the question? Oh, have people reacted positively or negatively? It's honestly been overwhelmingly positive. As soon as we explain to our guests why we do what we do, it is almost immediately accepted by them. The biggest piece of negative feedback that we receive typically is that they wish they could give us a larger tip.
We were part
It
of the
is that
group that tried to do so and were thwarted from doing.
as long as we recognize that that's something we're doing and therefore realize that it's incumbent upon us to deliver top-notch service, then we're covered. As soon as that becomes, as soon as that's missed, then we've lost and we'll start to have a lot more problems and we'll have to start dealing with a lot more customer pushback. But as long as we're always putting the guest experience first from a front of house perspective, and we're always living up to what the guest is expecting from a hospitality standpoint, we're going to continue to exceed their expectations, and we're going to continue to not receive any pushback for mandating a tip percentage.
Right. And we have another question. What made you comfortable entering such a competitive industry?
I had previously worked in the film industry, which is pretty much the only industry that is more rigorous and more, I guess, like berating than the restaurant industry. My first boss out of college was an infamous individual named Scott Rudin, who is a film producer most notable for yelling and screaming at all of his assistants. And I was his lead assistant for about 9 months out of college, just getting absolutely screamed at. And so at that point, everything felt easier and everything felt less competitive and like a breeze at that point. So going to culinary school and getting yelled at on a daily basis felt like they were being kind to me.
You mentioned actually that particular experience got you a foot in the door once you got to New York into the restaurant
Did I mean
industry.
my boss at Olmsted, I had never worked at a restaurant before, and I started working at Olmsted in a front of house capacity before I even went to culinary school. I just started handing my resume out to a bunch of different restaurants. I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And I got lucky in that the Max Katzenberg, who was the managing owner again at Olmsted, had recognized Scott Rudin on that resume and recognized that if someone can deal with him, they can deal with just about anyone in the culinary world. And the chef Greg at Olmsted is notoriously difficult to work with, and it was no problem. It was a piece of cake. He was all smiles compared to Scott Rudin.
Amazing. And we had another question. You're clearly super passionate about cooking and in the food industry. Did you always want to do this?
Yes and no. I think that it was something that I always wanted to do, but something that I was never really working towards because it was something that I didn't really fully realize was a possibility for me. It was something I mentioned when I was talking about Danny Meyer.
Mhm.
And then as soon as I left film pretty briefly out of college, it was immediately aware to me or clear to me that that's the path that I should be following. That I was not going down the path that was meant for me. And when I started to think about the things that I was really passionate about, it was pretty much just golf and cooking, and golf was not a possibility. And so I just immediately enrolled in culinary school and pretty much dove headlong into it.
Was there a moment for you that that changed things? So was there a moment where you realized that this was a path that was open to you?
I think back to a very specific conversation that, again, I had with my dad, where I had just uh, quit the company I was working for, the production company I was at, and it had then only dawned on me that film was not what I was supposed to be doing, but it had not yet become clear to me what I should be doing. Um, and he was basically just like, look, you've loved cooking your entire life. Why don't you just pursue that? I was like,
Mhm.
well, I can't. And he's like, why? So ultimately, I couldn't really answer that question. And so it was, I literally like 3 weeks after that point that I started culinary school. Like a week after that, I was working the door at Olmsted, and within a month was at culinary school.
It's amazing. One last question. What inspired the name Forsythia?
Two things. One, it is just a beautiful flower and a flower that I really like. And then second, the symbolism behind it is that it is the first flower to bloom every spring, and is a sign that kind of the crappy part is behind you, and that there's something a lot more beautiful to look forward to. Um, and kind of with that said, the Forsythia bloom is expected to happen this week or next, which is very exciting. And we're on the lookout for as many Forsythia flowers as we can find to decorate the restaurant. So
Very
that's really the meaning behind the restaurant. Is really just the symbolism behind uh, turning a new page and starting something that's a lot more beautiful than what came before it.
and there's nothing more appropriate than that in this moment.
No, there is not.
Thank you so much for all of these insights. Just want to let everyone know how to book a table. So Resi is the right place to go for an actual table at Forsythia. What time do the reservations go live? It is a very hard one to get. I've had to stalk the Resi. That notify me button has been like the bane of my existence. If you could let us know like when we should be stalking.
They go online at 10 a.m. 21 days in advance.
21 days in advance. And also, if the other way to experience Forsythia is through the marketplace, and that's available on Caviar. Anything that we should
On
know about
caviar
that?
for pickup or delivery.
Pickup or delivery?
The only thing about that is it is going fully virtual next week, so we won't have a physical marketplace that you can come in and check out because we will be opening up for indoor dining. So it is just going fully remote to caviar, but that's pretty much it.
And what are your delivery zones for all of us New Yorkers?
We deliver within a 2 mile radius of the restaurant.
And the restaurant being on the Lower East.
Lower East Side.
Perfect.
Although a little bit more central, really in between 2nd and Bowery.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us for future
Thank you very much for having me.
For future Stanford Startups events, you can go to our website, stanfordstartupsny.com. We also have a mailing list to be notified first for any future events. We hope to see you soon.